And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started just out of respect for everybody's time. Very excited to have you guys with us here today. So hello and welcome to Revize's 10 Most Effective Web Designs for Residents webinar. We hold webinars every other month here at Revize. So some brief housekeeping before we go ahead and get started. There's going to be a recorded version of this webinar on the Revize site after, so don't worry about it if you hopped on late or you missed any information. We're going to hold a brief Q&A after the webinar as well. So any questions that you have, feel free to jot them down, as well as follow us on social media. That's the best way to keep up with upcoming virtual events. And a little bit about us before we get started as well. So we at Revize have been around for over 20 years, and we have a developed and diverse team. We specialize in beautiful, accessible, usable web design for government agencies. And we're based out of Troy, Michigan, but we serve governments all across the US. Your hosts today are me, marketing specialist Dani Esterline, and expert web designer Alex Parent. So before we get started with some of the information we have today, I'm going to share a brief TED Talk. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to make us watch the whole thing, but this sets up some of the tone for the content, brand, and design information we'll be talking about during this webinar. The TED Talk speaker is Tony Fadell. He actually attended University of Michigan and was born in Detroit. He's an entrepreneur, inventor, co-creator of the iPhone, and former CEO of Nest Labs. So,
in the great 1980s movie, The Blues Brothers, there's a scene where John Belushi goes to visit Dan Aykroyd in his apartment in Chicago for the very first time. It's a cramped, tiny space, and it's just 3 feet away from the train tracks. As John sits on Dan's bed, a train goes rushing by, rattling everything in the room. John asks, "How often does that train go by?" Dan replies, "So often, you won't even notice it." And then something falls off the wall. We all know what he's talking about. As human beings, we get used to everyday things really fast. As a product designer, it's my job to see those everyday things, to feel them, and try to improve upon them. For example, see this piece of fruit? See this little sticker? That sticker wasn't there when I was a kid. But somewhere as the years passed, someone had the bright idea to put that sticker on the fruit. Why? So it could be easier for us to check out at the grocery counter. Well, that's great. We can get in and out of the store quickly. But now there's a new problem. When we get home and we're hungry and we see this ripe, juicy piece of fruit on the counter, we just want to pick it up and eat it. Except now we have to look for this little sticker and dig at it with our nails, damaging the flesh. Then rolling up that sticker, you know what I mean, and then trying to flick it off your fingers, right? It's not fun, not at all. But something interesting happened. See, the first time you did it, you probably felt those feelings. You just wanted to eat the piece of fruit, but you felt upset. You just wanted to dive in. By the 10th time, you started to become less upset, and you started to just do the peeling the label off. By the 100th time, at least for me, I became numb to it. I simply picked up the piece of fruit, dug at it with my nails, tried to flick it off, and then wonder, was there another sticker? So why is that? Why do we get used to everyday things? Well, as human beings, we have limited brain power. And so our brains encode the everyday things we do into habits, so we can free up space to learn new things. It's a process called habituation, and it's one of the most basic ways as humans we learn. Now, habituation isn't always bad. Remember learning to drive? I sure do. Your hands clenched at 10 and 2 on the wheel, looking at every single object out there, the cars, the lights, the pedestrians, is a nerve-wracking experience. So much so that I couldn't even talk to anyone else in the car, and I couldn't even listen to music. But then something interesting happened. As the weeks went by, driving became easier and easier. You habituated it. It started to become fun and second nature. And then you could talk to your friends again and listen to music. So there's a good reason why our brains habituate things. If we didn't, we'd notice every little detail all the time. It would be exhausting, and we'd have no time to learn about new things. But sometimes habituation isn't good. If it stops us from noticing the problems that are around us, well, that's bad. And if it stops us from noticing and fixing those problems, well, then that's really bad.
So Tony does a nice job of explaining why brand identity and awareness is so imperative when it comes to web design, and how innovation embarks new habituations for us as humans as well. So as I said, I wasn't going to make you guys watch the whole entire video, but summed up, here are some of the points from Tony Fadell's TED Talk. Design is broken up into these sort of 4 concepts, more or less, looking broader at the big picture of what we need for technological innovation, looking closer at the tiny details that make things easier, more accessible, or beautiful, thinking young, asking curious questions that make shortcuts for us as humans, and using repetition, just like the apples with the sticker on the apple, to create brand awareness and identity. So this video that I'm playing right now is actually a video from awards.com, which is a prominent website that celebrates web design's awards that are creative excellence. And this video does a nice job of showing the Vogue logo that helps explain the brand entity. You instantly recognize it, as well as it illustrates thinking young, using closer details and looking at the broader picture of the task at hand. So just like humans, residents are habitual creatures as well. I mean, think about it. This morning, what did you do before you got started for your work day or your work from home day? You made the coffee, you brushed your teeth, you ate that same bowl of oatmeal that you eat every day, Monday through Friday. These are habits that humans engage in every day to create normalcy. Just like us, residents engage in habits every day. They go to check out parks and recreational activities to go visit their families and play with families. They pay their bills online on the resident websites, and they follow up on news, especially COVID-19 news recently with the pandemic. We know that habits create routines and that routines create regulated and consistent outcomes. We know this from other things in life. Just like when we set the coffee pot timer for the next morning, we know that the coffee is going to be made for as soon as we get up. We know we're more likely to go to the gym if we set out a gym outfit next to our bed. Things like that create regulated outcomes. And our human brains look for easy shortcuts to make processes go quicker. Tony Fadell did a nice job of explaining why we need shortcuts, because our brain has so much capacity to learn different things. Although we do want to be able to notice the changes in certain innovations. And web design caters to this concept. Residents want to look for clear, easy shortcuts to complete these habitual tasks, like finding out community information. They don't just want to comb through a bunch of content and not be able to find what they need to use. So here are some web design best practice principles for residents as we go through the web design process. User experience. So like any other web design, resident websites or government websites cater to this aspect of site mapping. Using this as a hierarchical list, there's easy to view navigation on user experience friendly sites. So that means large text and images, and lasting brand awareness. So just like that video I showed earlier with the Vogue, users immediately recognize that logo. We want that to be a prominent feature of brand, because people will end up knowing your name without even seeing your name. And content needs to reflect the organization's brand. Also, there needs to be instantly recognized photos that accurately depict the region. For example, a resident or government agency website in Alaska wouldn't use a photo of a beach because it would be misleading. And finally, the functions of the website need to match the government goals. Just like any business or corporation, government agencies and municipalities have goals for their websites, whether that be their citizens receive information, pay their bills, or to invoke more tourism. The content and the format of the website needs to align with those goals. So, for example, if a government agency in Las Vegas, their main goal is to get more tourists to come to Las Vegas, to come to the Strip, they're going to make content easier for them to find those tourist locations, for them to be able to see what they can do with their families, friends, all where they're during their stay. And also, user engagement features needs to be accessible for everybody. It simply wouldn't be right if we didn't give rights to access the website that way. So it needs to be accessible for anybody that stumbles upon your website. And now what I'm going to do is hand it over to expert web designer, Alex Parent. And he's going to better describe the 10 most effective web designs for residents.
Thanks, Danny. So now we'll look at the 10 elements for effective web designs. Now, some of these are going to have some overlap, and they should have overlap. Essentially, what we want to do with these elements is put them all together to make one successful website. So the first thing we're going to look at is welcoming content sections. These sections usually use strong photography of your region or of certain things within your city or town. Maybe it's a park or a beach or something like that. Maybe it's a historic building. Sometimes these sections can use interesting graphic elements as well. If you have a really strong brand with interesting graphic elements that tie into your brand, that could be another element that we use here. These elements also generally use bold or interesting fonts such as scripts or handwriting. The example we see here, their slogan for their city is the friendly city. So we chose to use a script handwritten looking font that kind of makes it look a little bit more inviting and human to the user than just a plain bold font. These sections usually don't have too much text. We want to tell a story without making people read. And finally, these sections don't have to just be at the top of your website. Sometimes, as we'll discuss in a little bit, users kind of become accustomed to seeing a big, pretty picture at the top of your site, and they may just scroll down right away. If we start to use these welcoming content sections to emphasize maybe an event or some news or something like that, maybe a mayor section where he or she has a welcome message, those types of elements, if they're more inviting, the user is more likely to read and engage with those elements. Next, we'll talk about colors and design reference to your brand. Now, a brand isn't just a logo. A lot of people kind of get this confused, especially with their website. The number one most common request I, as a designer, get from a client is, can you make my logo bigger? Our goal is to make your brand visible throughout the design of your website, generally through the use of color, but also, as I mentioned earlier, through maybe other design elements such as icons or other graphics, and definitely the fonts that are used in your logo, or at least fonts that are similar to the ones used in your logo. Referencing the colors and other elements of your brand throughout your website helps anchor your brand to the users. It creates an image of trust for your users, and you can use this as a tool for consistency across all platforms, not just your website. It can be used for signage, branding on city vehicles, elements in your parks or anything like that. The more your brand is out there as far as colors, fonts, and a look and feel that you establish, the more recognizable you'll be to your users and your residents. Beyond just using specific colors from your logo, we can also use various shades of your brand colors. The example we have here on the screen, their logo is a basic yellow and green logo, but as you can see, the design also includes some tans and other off-whites, which are essentially just desaturated yellows. What doing this allows us to do is create some visual contrast without actually breaking away from your brand colors. Next, we'll look at a meaningful use of your hero area. We refer to the top section of your website, the first thing that your users see, as the hero of your website. Generally speaking, most of the heroes you see on websites today are large photos. Sometimes they use a tagline or a welcome message across the top. As I mentioned earlier, users have become so accustomed to elements like this that sometimes they just gloss over it or start scrolling down the site right away. In the example we have here, there's still a large photo, but it only takes up about half of the width of the page, which allowed us to use the other space to create a welcome message that users can be engaged with as soon as they land on the website. Large, pretty pictures always look great, but they are definitely overdone. Changing up this go-to solution will definitely grab a user's attention in a meaningful way. The other thing we can add, and we call the bottom of the page before you start scrolling, we refer to that as the fold. That's kind of like an old print reference to newspapers. So one thing we can do is maybe add your quick links or something like that above the fold as well. That can help users engage with things without ever even needing to scroll. A lot of times those quick links include things like bill pay or finding forms or something like that that are everyday needs for your residents. And if we can get users to those elements in a very quick way, it will make their day easier, and it'll probably save them a phone call and save you having to answer a phone call as well. Next, we'll talk about use of photography in your website. As I mentioned, using photography throughout your website is a great way to establish yourself to your residents. It will make sure that people that might be visiting know who you are before they even come. And it'll allow the residents that are currently living there to know where they're at without having to see your name or anything like that. Custom photography goes a really long way in building a sense of trust and comfort for your users, and high quality photography will definitely draw in potential residents and visitors. One thing to keep in mind is pretty much no matter where you live, there will be a photographer that can take high quality pictures for you. Some of them may be willing to even do it for free if you're willing to give them recognition for their work. Another thing to consider if you don't have a photography at your disposal or you can't afford to hire a photographer, just about any smartphone these days, as long as it's a higher end smartphone, can do the job of taking decent looking photographs for your website. Next, we'll talk about the use of space without feeling wasted. The most common way to use space is just to simply use white space, adding space around different elements such as your news posts, your events, things like that. Oftentimes, one complaint I hear from clients is that there's too much white on the screen. I understand the concern when they bring that information to me. However, that space is what makes your content readable and easily digestible for users. However, there are ways to work around the feeling of too much white on the screen. White space can actually be any color. So sometimes we will use a dark background color with contrasting light information and text or icons or things like that. And this white space can also be used as sort of a design element in the website itself. As you see in this example here, we have a big pretty picture across the top of the page with a little welcome message or a tagline, but then there's this slight transparent green-blue box over the top of half of the photo. What this does is it allows you to see the photo all the way through. However, it adds some visual contrast and breaks up what the user normally expects to see on your website. Strong use of colors, as we talked about with your brand, can anchor your brand throughout the website. It can also create some interesting visual cues to your users. This website we have here uses a couple different colored shapes to break up that big boxy photo in an interesting way. Now, if these boxes weren't here in the top left and bottom right corner, it would just look like an everyday website with no design thought at all. However, adding that triangle and the interesting curved box at the bottom completely breaks up what the user might expect to see when they come to the website. With colors, even if you don't have an established brand or logo, just color can create that brand for your city or town. With using colors, strong contrast is essential. If we only have dark colors to work with, there's not much we can do beyond putting a dark color on a white background or white text on a dark background. As I mentioned earlier, we can use various shades of a couple colors to make your website look very diverse in color without having to add 5 or 6 different colors. Next, we'll talk about starting content right away for the viewer. We mentioned this a little bit when we looked at meaningful use of the hero area. As I mentioned before, adding content above the fold will grab a user's attention immediately. Sometimes we only have 3 to 5 seconds to grab that user's attention, especially if it's a non-resident coming that might be wanting to visit you in the future. Residents will generally give you a little bit more time, but if they can't find a form or how to pay their bill within a 30-second to a minute window, chances are they're just going to call you, and that takes time out of your day. Things we can do to make content start right away is reduce that area of the photo or add content over the top. As you see here, this photo has a colored gradient that fades to the side to allow that text to stand out a bit more. And again, it breaks up that everyday consistent thing that we're used to seeing at the top of a website. And then we have a bit of an alert bar below that, and then some quick links below those. All of those elements would be visible to the user before they even started scrolling down the site, and they may never have to even scroll to find what they're looking for. Another thing we can do beyond just white space to make content more digestible and easy to read for a user is to break those sections up. It wasn't that long ago that users asked for everything to be crammed into one viewport on your screen. So if you scrolled at all, a lot of people considered that poor web design. Nowadays, most users are on a smartphone or a tablet, so they are very used to scrolling regardless of the size of your site. But even on a desktop version, users are comfortable and expect to have to scroll down your site. So instead of cramming everything into one box with your news, your events, all of your links, we can separate those elements to make everything more visually pleasing, more engaging to the user, and absolutely more digestible for them. Next, we have overlapping elements. This is a tool that I like to personally use as a visual cue to inform the user that there is more information below what they're looking at. Sometimes it comes in the form of boxes or circles overlapping other elements. Another thing that I like to do is maybe have a shape or a curve or something bleed off the bottom of the page that kind of indicates to the user, if you start scrolling, you're going to see the rest of this. A lot of websites that you go to, you'll see a little button at the bottom of the picture that says scroll down for more. In my opinion, if we have to tell a user how to use our websites, we've failed at our job of making a good experience for that user. Beyond the usability, overlaps can create an interesting visual experience for the user. It can add more depth and contrast to the design, and it can break up the boxy, gritty feel that a lot of websites tend to have. Finally, we'll talk about large headers and navigations. The site we have on the screen here uses an approach I like to use frequently, which is a 2-tiered navigation, where you have a smaller top bar for elements such as your contact information, maybe translate, font size, social media links. And what that allows us to do is make more room for your main navigation for your pages like departments and residents and things like that. Beyond just having a large navigation bar, another thing we can do is make what we call a sticky navigation, where the navigation stays at the top of your website as the user begins to scroll. This gives users a sense of control as they're using the website. They never feel lost. They never have to worry about finding the navigation bar once they get deep into your website. It creates an overall better experience for that user. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dani.
Thanks, Alex. So putting it all together, as I said earlier, this webinar is going to be uploaded on our virtual events page on the Revize site. But here are the 10 most effective web designs for residents. Welcoming content sections, colors and design reference to the brand, meaningful use of the hero area or top area of the page, use of photography that accurately depicts the region, use of space without feeling wasted, strong colors, content that starts right away, breakup sections that are digestible, overlapping elements, and large headers. And now we're going to have a brief Q&A. So if you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat and we'll answer them in a first come, first served basis. Okay, so if there's no questions, this is, oh, it looks like we have one coming up. Ideas on how to balance a good polished website with clunky government forms we might be linking to. Alex, do you have any suggestions?
Sure. So we actually have a very strong tool for organizing forms on an inner page of your website. They can be organized in a number of different ways, maybe by form categories or by departments or something like that. And essentially what we can do is create a list of all the forms that are available without taking up a ton of space on the page, so a user can quickly find or search for a form that they're looking for, click the link to that form, and just get it right away.
Yeah, because I know some of those forms can kind of be overwhelming to the average viewer. Martha Fessenden asks us, Alex, if do you need to have a professional to design your website? Oops.
I would argue, yes, you absolutely need a professional to design your website. There are a number of things you need to consider when designing a website that often get overlooked. And a lot of times when a client comes to us to design a website and they just have something like a standard WordPress template or something like that, a lot of key elements get overlooked, or especially from a programming perspective, things like security often get overlooked. Things like getting users where they need to go quickly are things that a company like ours are experts in and have been doing for a long time.
Yeah, that's a great point to make, because I know some of those cheaper options, although they may be usable, they don't offer the security protections that we do.
Right.
Are there any other last minute questions?
It looks like we have a question from Dave. Beautiful examples. How do you find a balance between ADA compliance and gorgeous/inviting imagery that demands a response? So every design we create, we use a tool to check for ADA compliancy. Our goal is always AA standard compliancy. We shoot for AAA. However, a lot of times, unfortunately, little things like the choices a client may make for a photo down the road can break that AAA. But as long as we're hitting a AA standard, we're pretty confident that everyone's going to be able to access the website in a meaningful way. We do also offer use of an ADA widget that sits in the bottom corner of your screen for a user. And what that allows the user to do is take full control over the way the website looks. They can remove colors, increase contrast, remove photos, a number of different things, increase font size. I believe that tool even offers an option for their computer to read the website to them in case they're visually impaired.
We have another question from Tom Lukes or Lux. Sorry, excuse me if I pronounce any of these names wrong. How do you get consistency when 20 people work on the site? I might try to go ahead and answer this one, Alex, and then if you want to tag team it. So what I found with clients that we have, so it can kind of be an overwhelming thing, right? When 20 people are working on a website, especially when one person has a mission or a vision at hand. I think it's best kind of to be on the same page before getting a web design and then having maybe like 4 people or 5 people edit the site in charge of that and having different people dictate those responsibilities. What do you think, Alex?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I've run into situations a number of times where we'll ask for one list of changes that a client wants, and the information they provide back is a list of 5 people's changes. And John will want to remove the green and change it to blue, but Jenny wants to keep the blue. And so we run into this situation where the designer doesn't have any direction to go with because every person that provides feedback wants something different. I agree with Danny that having a consistent goal in mind before going in is definitely going to be the easiest way to alleviate those pain points. The other thing I'd add is trust the designer you work with. We don't make choices because we want to. I don't pick blue because it's my favorite color. Sometimes the website requires a specific color for a specific reason, maybe to invoke a specific feeling, or maybe it reflects the brand as we discussed earlier. But no choice, whether it's a color, a font, even stock photos. I spend hours sometimes searching for the right stock photo that's inevitably going to get replaced before the website gets launched, just to make sure that our customers have a good idea of what their website should look like.
So we'll get to some of these, more of these questions. We'll take a couple of more. So Michael Nelson asks, what is an optimal website size, total pages or menus, and what's a good number to have?
Sure. So unfortunately, there isn't really a one-size-fits-all answer to this question. If you have a town of 10,000 people, you might only need 3 to 5 pages for your entire website. However, if you have 150,000 people, 3 to 5 pages won't even cover half of one department for you. That being said, we have some creative ways to navigate websites for larger page counts. We like to use what's called a mega menu for a lot of our websites. And essentially what that is a large expanded list of all of your interior pages broken down so that users don't have to hover over 8 different elements to find the one page they might be looking for. Using a search element in your website can also be an easy way for users to find what they need fast. We do offer a predictive search feature on our websites. So if a user starts to type dog, for example, it'll automatically autofill that idea that you're looking for a dog permit or something like that to register your dog, for example.
Yeah, that's a great point. So Roxanne asks, what platforms or software do you suggest for building nonprofit websites? So I would say that nonprofit and government agencies and municipalities often require a lot of security, just because the nature of nonprofit deals with some people that might have information on the sites, give or take what you will with it. I know we at Revize do nonprofit works at well. Alex, do any certain softwares come to mind? Do you have anything to add?
No, I would agree with you. I definitely don't think just because you're a nonprofit devalues the importance of really well-designed and maintained websites. So I would definitely say if you can afford to work with someone that provides a quality service, I would go that route over a cheap or free option every time.
Absolutely. I think there was one I missed, and then we'll wrap it up really quick. So I think Martha added on, what's the best way to get your ideas across to the designer, a list, a sketch, or both? I think it's important, some of the things that we mentioned in the earlier part of the Q&A, it's important to have those goals, right? And to reflect what the organization wants in the goals. So I would focus on that, and then from there compile a list. So based on whatever your agency, government agency, nonprofit goals are for the website, whether that be to gain more residents, whether that be for the nonprofit to gain more volunteers for certain events. Those are going to play really big factors into the way that the website is designed. And I think, I don't know, perhaps a sketch, but even like a color scheme, things that you want to all agree upon. That kind of relates to some of the question somebody was asking earlier about how to get 20 people to agree on something.
Absolutely. I have a couple more questions on my end as well. One quick one was, where can I find quality photos to use on the website? There's a couple websites that offer free, royalty-free pictures. Unsplash.com is my go-to. They have a photo for just about anything you could ever need, whether it be a family sitting at a dinner table or a kid playing in a park or something like that. One thing to keep in mind when using stock photos is try to get photos that are very nondescript of the area. You don't want to have a photo, as Danny mentioned earlier in the presentation. If you're in Alaska, you don't want to use palm trees in your stock photos. So be careful if you are using stock photos for your website. Another question was, is it easy, or is there an easy way to format things like board meeting documents for the current and prior years? And yes, as I mentioned earlier, we can organize those in a way where the list is broken up by year. There's also more advanced ways we can break those down into individual pages, but it's kind of ultimately up to you and your budget and things like that, how we organize those, but we can absolutely find a solution that will organize those well. Someone else asked if there's an added cost for the accessibility widget. And Danny, I don't know if you know the answer to this question off the top of your head, but I am 99% sure that there is a free option for that widget.
I'm of the same belief.
Okay, perfect.
But other than
Awesome.
that, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you guys so much for attending. This has been a really great, stimulating presentation to not only create, but to answer some of the Q&A. There's going to be a brief survey after the Zoom is ended, so please fill that out so we have feedback to gather more presentations of what you guys want to see. This is our contact information right here. So if you're interested in any of our products and services, a lot of the sites that we used on the presentation were Revize web design created sites. It's www.revize.com. If you have any additional questions or thoughts, comments, concerns, whatever about this webinar or future webinars, you can email us at contact@revize.com. The best number to reach us is 248-269-9263. And we are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And that's the best way to keep up with upcoming virtual events. And like I stated before, we're going to upload this webinar shortly on our page. So feel free to watch that at your own leisure. But thanks, everybody. And thanks, Alex.
Thank you.